Have you ever been at a place in your life or business where what you're doing just isn't working anymore? It might be the things you're offering, it might be your pricing, it might be your schedule, it might be downtime. It could be a number of things. Maybe you're just not even sure. It could be that there's just this unsettled feeling inside that just it's like something needs to change. If so, it might be time for a pivot. Now, what's a pivot? Well, pivot's really just a change in direction. And so in this episode, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about things like how to recognize when you might need to pivot, and also questions to ask and things you might need to consider as you're figuring out what you're going to do next. So grab a cup of coffee or other tasty beverage, pull up a chair, and let's chat about pivoting.
Welcome to the Jesus Coffee Yoga Podcast. Hey, if this is your first time here, let us know. We would love to connect with you and love to know who you are and how you found us and what God's doing in your life. This is a space where we get to sit down with teachers and leaders in the fitness industry, the wellness industry, and our hope, our prayer is to resource you with these conversations about business, ministry, and all the things we do, and empower you to live freely, to live lightly, and do the things you love while still living your life.
All right, so today is definitely a coffee day. I woke up a little earlier than normal, which I wake up pretty early anyways. You know, I don't know about you, but like I can tell when I wake up in the middle of the night if I'm going to fall back asleep or not. Like it's happened so often. Usually I went through this stretch where it was like 2:30, 3 o'clock, like every morning I'd wake up. Come on. Finally, I'm like, all right, Lord, like, I guess you want me to pray for people? I don't know. I would just pray. But yeah, this morning I woke up a little early and like I could just tell I'm not falling back asleep. So up I got. And feel like I'm dragging a little bit, so I need some assistance here from the old Joe.
Trusty dusty coffee. What are you drinking?
It's a Costa Rica Santa Maria Dota. So I thought, in honor of Kristen's Costa Rica trip, I would drink some Costa Rican coffee. So cheers.
Well, I'm just drinking water because I have been trying to lower my caffeine. I've told you guys. I cut the coffee whenever I feel like my body is storing anxiety, like when I'm literally feel like I'm anxious from the inside out. And the last couple of, I don't know, probably a week or so, I've been feeling that. And because I've kind of added it back in. I love coffee so much. We have a podcast with the word coffee in it, and I love it. So I have been introducing it back into my diet, just like in the mornings, having coffee. And this last week or so, I've just been feeling that uptick of anxiety. And that could be some other things too. Obviously, I'm leaving the country for 8 days and, lots of other things. Actually, this conversation is one of those things that's been weighing heavily. It's a good tension to manage, right? Manage the tension. So I'm just drinking water this morning. I did have 1 cup of tea and I ran a lot this morning. So I'm feeling quite energized. Nick, before we started this podcast, Nick was doing push-ups to boost his energy.
Jumping jacks.
Movement breeds movement, y'all. That's what we do. So anyways, We're excited about this conversation. And actually, like fun fact, we had a whole different episode planned for you. And literally like an hour and 4 minutes before we sat down to record this podcast, I was like, I think this is something else I feel really strongly about. And just in the last 10 minutes, I've made all of these notes of how I'm processing it. I think this is what we should talk about. So we actually pivoted this morning, and that's what we're going to talk about because it's inevitable. Like Nick, I mean, even in your own business, have you seen this? Even in the corporate world, like have you seen this idea of pivoting, big or small, in your companies?
Yeah, I think it's a consistent theme you see everywhere. And those who don't pivot don't make it. So sometimes it's because of a shift in the market. Sometimes it's a shift in what leadership feels like the direction they want to take the company. For smaller businesses, kind of same thing. Like what got you to where you are might not get you to where you need to go next. And it might not even sustain you with where you're at, again, because of things that could have changed in the market, like COVID, anybody.
Right.
There could be any number of reasons that could lead to needing to pivot. So I think just expecting that at some point you will need to pivot, and that, not to dive into what we're going to talk about, but we need to be flexible, like you had said, that it's not about being married to the how. We're married to the what, the mission, the purpose. Like that doesn't change, but what you do or how you go about doing that is probably going to change at some point. So
why do you think that people either fear the pivot or why they don't pivot? Because what I've seen time and time again in any area of business and honestly just life is like it happens. And what we do with it kind of determines, like we were using the thought of like a car, right? Like you're driving and like sometimes you're like, there's my turn. Scoop. Like you have to like throw yourself into it because it's coming up really fast because you maybe weren't paying attention or you weren't, whatever. And some people, it's like a soft brake, blinker, turn, like they're expecting it, right? And then some people, it's like they go 4 miles down the road and have to do a U-turn and come back, right? So why do you think that many of us struggle with the idea of pivoting, or why is it kind of has like a bad rap, like the word feedback. When we hear that, we're like, ooh, you know what I mean? Like, but it's a gift.
I think most of the time when you boil it down, it's fear. It's fear of the unknown, fear of making the wrong choice. That what I've, like what we build, it's like our baby, it's very important to us and it's very subjective. We have all these feelings and things wrapped up in it. And for some of us, it might be attached to our way of life. And so there's a great, and some of it is valid. I'm not saying your fears are not valid, but like sometimes we're afraid of things that just aren't even like real. But other times, like it's an actual real thing. What if you make a choice that causes your business to crash and burn? Like there is that fear, and there's no guarantees. So we're like, I feel like I need to do this, but what if it doesn't work? And a lot of times we let that muddy the waters and get in the way. So I think almost any reason that's stopping you from making the change, I think you can tie all of that back to fear of something. And a lot of times too, of maybe you're not bringing God into the conversation, or maybe He is, and like that's where the fear is. But still, I like fear is just a huge part of that.
I 100% agree. And I think if we can listen to this podcast or even have this conversation and take it out of business only, like I think this can be applicable to any part of our life. And you hit the nail on the head. And that's kind of our very first like point that we're going to talk about when it looks like taking steps to pivot is seeking God in it and asking Him, like we're doing this thing for the Lord, right? Like we are, okay, God, use me. Here I am, send me. And then He's like, go there. And you're like, no, I don't know what's over there. I'm kind of scared. What if my livelihood, what if I mess this up? But we have to ask ourselves why we're even considering the pivot, right? Like what's not working. And again, we'll get into that a little bit, but I think just listening to this podcast with open hands, open ears, and open heart to allow God to be a part of this conversation, because that was the very first thing when I was thinking through. And you guys, this is a real time situation for me. And I think that's why I felt so compelled and so strongly to bring it to you, because this is actually kind of where I'm at now. So we've talked a little bit in my story in earlier episodes about the big pivot that I made, going from memberships to series only model, like a boutique fitness model. And it was the scariest part of my yoga business career that I've ever made. And I learned so much from that and I grew so much from that. So now that I feel like I'm coming up on what might be another pivot, I don't feel so afraid. So no, I don't know how it's going to play out. I don't know if I'm going to make the right choice or not. I don't know if this is going to be whatever. But I do know that when you make those steps, I do feel like I've seen the faithfulness of God come in behind me and go before me and all of these things in all of it. So that's where as I find myself here real time, I wanted to kind of just talk through this. And the first person I reached out to when I was kind of coming up on this is I messaged Nick and I was like, hey, I want to talk this out. Let me know what you think. And then he gave me some really good practical things to think through, like think through these things, sit on it, pray on it, all of those things. You don't have to do it right now. Like sometimes you do. Sometimes your turn is coming up real fast and you need to like drift into there. And hopefully this conversation will help you avoid having to make a hard pivot quickly and what can feel like impulsively, right? So I recognize where I'm at now. It brings me to, is it time for me to pivot? Is it time for me to make some small tweaks that might make big differences? Is it time for me to do a big thing? You know what I mean? So I just thought bringing this conversation and just kind of just open and honest and raw about it, hopefully could help some of you, even if it's not in your business, and just help you identify that. So I want to share a scripture before we get into our content today. It feels like it has zero to do with business, but I feel like this is a scripture I was reading the other day in my Bible that really brought me some assuredness as I was kind of just processing where I'm at, not even just in business, but just as a person, as a human right now. Life is quite messy for me. I've got a lot of things outside of business. And actually, the business side of it is doing really well. Like the way we've structured it, the way that we've been teaching you how to grow teams and delegate and do all those things. It's the model that I'm running is actually beautiful and it's working. And I'll tell you why there needs to be a little pivot to keep it running the way it is. But the scripture that I felt like the Lord just brought to me and brought me so much assurance, I'm going to share it with you. It comes from the 23rd Psalm, which y'all know, if you've been here longer than 4.2 seconds, this is where my heart is these last couple of years, especially. It's the last one. And it's really just the first part of that I feel like he was showing me. It says, so why would I fear the future? Only goodness and tender love pursue me all the days of my life. And I felt as if God was showing me, have I not gone before you? Have I not pursued you? Have I not followed behind you and cleaned up your mess? All the things, like, have I not done it before? Why would you need to fear the future now? So as I'm approaching what feels like maybe a pivot, like really in life, like we're looking at moving, we're doing all these things, right? So why would I fear the future? Because God's done it before and I can look back, even just in the context of business, he's been faithful to provide all my needs, to provide the people, to provide the resources, all of the things. Why would I fear the future when only his goodness pursues me all the days of my life? And so when we are looking at taking our steps to a pivot, right? The very first thing we're going to do is seek God. We're going to invite him. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, because I am pretty strong when it comes to decisiveness. I will say that maybe due to grief, I'm not sure, or just the messiness of life these last couple years, I feel like my quickness to make a decision has weakened just a little bit. But as a whole, as a person, I'm pretty decisive. Like I don't like spending a lot of time ruminating on things or obsessing over things or thinking of all the ways it could go wrong. I'm like, what's the best that could happen? This sometimes I will skip. Like I'll just be like, this looks like a good thing. Let's go over there. Let's do that. And I don't even consider because I know God is good and he is a great rerouter and he will bless me, in his permissible will. But I don't even sit and seek him sometimes about my very next step. So that's why I wanted to share that scripture with you and kind of the heart behind this conversation. Do you want to add something, Nick, before we start working our way down the steps? I see you typing, so I don't want to
Well, I had another thought of why people don't pivot or why they put it off. They're afraid to get outside of what's comfortable and known. So it's kind of related to the fear of the unknown, but sometimes we won't make a change or try something new because the pain of making the change is bigger than the pain of staying the same. And until that tips, you just won't do anything.
I think too, like sometimes we're just the dysfunction is our safe place because we've learned to operate there. We've learned to muscle up. We've learned to compensate. We've learned to expect whatever it is that we're facing because it's known. It's predictable at this point, even though it's dysfunctional and toxic to our souls, right? Like we've just been okay with that instead of saying, hey God, what do you have in mind? And obeying, that's like a whole nother level of and stepping into it and trusting him with that.
Yeah. And sometimes too, knowing that making a change is going to mean more work. And if you're in a season of I am maxed out, so that can be one of the indications that it's time for a pivot when you're just like, you're maxed out, you're redlining. The thought of making a change just seems like overwhelming because you're already maxed out. And it's going to take some extra work to change things. And so that's just another reason people use to not pivot or not make the change that they really know they need to make. So that's one really good indication that it might be time for a pivot or a change. Some others might be sustained decrease in your revenue. So I don't mean like seasonal fluctuations or, the occasional ups and downs. That's just a normal part of business. But if maybe over the period of a quarter, your revenue is consistently dropping, then that could be a good indication. Also, same thing with attendance. If your attendance seems to be dropping and people aren't coming to classes, and even if you offer a membership, you might find this like when we talk to people and coaching clients, one, we usually advise not to go to the membership model because we've been there and we know how it's going to end usually.
Until you have sustained increase.
Yeah. But usually what happens is you offer all these classes and you have this membership and it's great for a little bit. And then people just kind of get bored or busy and they keep paying, but they stop coming. You might find yourself in that season. That might be a good indication that it's time to pivot the way you're doing things.
Yeah. Another indication is, I'm going to use the word that you use, sustained, because I do think there are momentary influxes of stress and anxiety. But I would say if you find yourself constantly feeling stressed or anxious about your work, your business, or fill in the blank here, I think that's because I do think, like we've said before, Andy Stanley always says, pay attention to the tension. And tension is not always bad. Time under tension can make you better and stronger. So not every little like flare up of stress in your body is bad, or in your mind or in your business, things like that. But if you find that you are just constantly stressed and anxious, especially around your work and these things, I think that there is something to that, whether that's a personal pivot, something you need to do personally. So I told you guys I've been feeling really anxious, so I'm pivoting from drinking coffee. So that's one of the things and Nick's like sipping his coffee right now. I'm like, I'm sure it's delicious, but I don't want to have like a midlife crisis at noon. So I think that's one. And then kind of along the same thought theory, just a lack of like enthusiasm and joy for the work. I think this is really important as leaders because of the work we do. I think you're going to have days where, if you're like me today, my car died from going from my 5 a.m. to my 6 a.m. appointments. So early in the morning, I'm like out there jump starting my car. Obviously, you're going to have days where you just show up and it's been a day at 6 a.m. But if you feel like just overall, when you think about teaching your classes, you're just not feeling enthusiasm or joy or like even excitement, which I know excitement can be fleeting, then I think that's something to pay attention to, right? Like
Yep.
I think that matters.
Another way to phrase it might be like, I'm just not having fun anymore. And not that, I mean, work is work. Like, not all work is fun. There's some stuff that's just not fun. I don't know hardly anyone who loves bookkeeping except for bookkeepers maybe,
I'm
but
so excited for my taxes.
I I can't wait to wash the rag or the not rags, wash the washcloths that we use in class. Or, like there's aspects of it that aren't super fun. I can't wait to scrub the floor. Like, I'm not talking about that, but just this overarching feeling of like, I just don't enjoy this anymore. Or maybe another way to say it might be, I dread this instead of looking forward to this.
And I think it takes like a lot of honesty to get there, because I think sometimes we'll be like, this is my blessing. I've worked so hard for this. God has created a way for me to be here and to do these things. And it's almost like we gaslight ourselves. If I can just be like kind of candid, like we'll just tell ourselves like, it's not okay to feel that way. And I'm here to say, like, just be honest. Like, even if you don't ever tell another soul and you don't change another thing and you just keep doing what you're doing, are you still enjoying the work that you do? Like, is it still bringing you a sense of pride? Like you're proud of it. You're proud of the work you do. You're proud of the people you get to work with. You're enjoying like that purpose. Like, is it still there? Again, you're not going to enjoy all of the aspects of anything. Like, all the good things. We love our kids, and I do not enjoy a lot of the things that come along with parenting, right? So that's we're not going to romanticize that. But can we be honest and say, do I dread this? Like, even just asking that question can feel really uncomfortable, because it's like, I shouldn't feel this way, right? And then we start to should on ourselves. We start to gaslight ourselves. So I think that's a really good way to kind of flip that question of like, am I enjoying it? It's like, yeah, I don't hate it. Or am I dreading it? That's an easier, I think, answer to question to answer.
And don't confuse something being hard. Sometimes I see this with our coaching clients or people that I've talked to is we confuse hard with like God's purpose for our lives. Like we almost think like, well, God, this is what God called me to do. Why is this so hard? Or why is it not easy? Well, I don't know if you've read the Bible, but I don't think I've ever read a story where God was like rolling out the red carpet and it was just easy. I mean, he did part the Red Sea, but they still had Egyptians on their tail and they still had to walk across and they still had to trust. I mean, there's so much more to it, but just don't confuse it. Don't think that just because it's hard that you're in the wrong because I mean, building a business is hard. There's no way around it. It's hard, but hard doesn't mean that you're in the wrong. Hard doesn't even mean that you need to pivot,
Mm-hmm.
but it's all these other things, this sustained feeling of I just don't like what I've built.
Yeah.
And like the reason I know all of these things, it's because I've been through this with my business and realizing, you know what got me to where I am today isn't going to get me to where I want to go. And honestly, it's not even going to sustain me with where I am today. I've been through seasons where I was just running a pace that was not sustainable. And I have a pretty high pain tolerance.
Yes, you
Kristen
do.
will vouch for that with how long that I can push hard and redline. But we're not machines, and even machines break if you run them redline all the time. Like machines even break down, and we're not even machines. So that's my next point is a really good indication it might be time for a change or a pivot is if you're redlining or if you feel like you're just maxed out, like you just can't take on another thing. And maybe you don't have time for rest. You don't have time for hobbies. Like you're not doing anything fun or play related or time for family. You know, if those things are really lacking consistently, it might be a good indication that something needs to change.
Yeah, it's really good. I want to highlight something you had said. You're talking about don't confuse something being hard for something being wrong. Like, and you said, have you ever read the Bible? And before you said that, I was thinking in my head, have you ever picked up a barbell? Like if I want to get stronger and faster and better, like I have to be okay with something feeling hard regularly on a regular basis. Now, can we over complicate things and make them harder for ourselves? Yes. Like, you know what I mean? Because there's only so much, but it's like just because it's hard doesn't mean it's wrong or doesn't even mean, even in this conversation, that it's time to pivot. So I like that you added that and highlighted that.
On the flip side of that, you might be in a season where things are really easy and you're bored. Now, I would say that doesn't mean it's time for a pivot necessarily. It could. It might just mean you need to buckle down and just tighten up the ship. And you might be in a season of enjoying the fruits of your labor and chasing that shiny penny, the shiny object syndrome could derail or kill your business. So I think there are even seasons of that where like, you know what, things are actually humming along pretty good. Maybe it's time to just, maybe that's a swing in the season of I'm going to have a little bit more rest and downtime and time with family, time volunteering, just whatever. So that doesn't mean necessarily it's time for a pivot, but it could. It could mean maybe it is time to spice things up or change it.
I love spicing things up. And that's why I love the model that we run for my studio, because it's just fresh. Like we have our normal things that we've always got some variation of something, but like right now we have a running group going and we have Pilates. We're adding a warm and cozy morning hot yoga. It's like, we've never done that before. And it's so fun just to be able to have the flexibility to do that. And then of course, having like your constants too, you have a little bit of both. So
we'll get right back to that episode. But before we continue, I wanted to share some time sensitive information with you. So this conversation is an example of what we do with other people when we walk them through big changes they need to make. When the business that they created just isn't working, we come alongside them. Me and Kristen, we come alongside them, help them process what's going on, and we help come up with clarity in what they really want and a vision and then a plan for how to get there. Not everyone is a good fit for one-on-one coaching. We want to invite you to a retreat that we're doing in November where we're going to walk teachers through this process of getting clarity in what they want, coming up with a plan for how to get there. And we're also going to have fun. We're going to play. We're going to rest. We're going to have some typical retreaty kind of stuff going on. But this isn't just your average retreat. We're going to dive into your business and help you with any areas that you need help in. We're going to have workshops on things like retreats, on mindset and business related topics, on marketing, teacher best practices, and really just developing a business around the life that you want to live. Now, the beach house that we're doing this at only has so much space, so there's very limited space available. So if this sounds like something you're interested in, don't delay because we expect this to sell out fast. You can find out more information over at christiansdoyoga.com/retreats. All right, now back to our episode.
All right, so what do we do? So we're saying, yes, I'm here, or maybe you're not here yet and you're just kind of filing away this information. File it away, because there will be a moment in your life, in your business, where you're going to come back to this conversation. You're going to remember, this is what they're talking about. So what are some steps we can, as we're okay, my turn's coming up, I need to pivot. What do we do? What steps do I take? What steps do we take? As I mentioned earlier, the very first one, seek God. Let's just highlight that, circle it, underline it, italicize it, seek God. And again, this is something that I, right now, today, real time, am very much doing. And I would say this is something that I'm just asking him, what do you have for this thing? This thing that it's my baby and I've grown it, blood, sweat, and tears, all the things. But what do you have? And I've got to be humble enough and still enough to wait and honor and obey the answer.
Yeah. And this might be something that you're really good at. I have some friends who are it's just their default to go to God first. And I don't know if it's because of the way I'm wired. Maybe it's part of being a man, that men and women are often quite different. Maybe it could be a number of things. With my work, with the video side of things, it's not like a Christian business. I mean, I'm a Christian who owns the business, but it's not like I'm teaching Christian yoga, where you're constantly in that. So sometimes it might be just that my default is often logic and what makes sense. It's more of thinking through things. And then sometimes if I find myself really unsure, or the anxiety side kind of cranks up, then I'll seek God. I often forget to seek God first, but what does Jesus say? Seek me first. Okay, Lord, you got my attention.
Kind of he knows what he's talking about. Seek first the kingdom of God, and all this will be added.
I think sometimes he allows it, he lets us get out of what's best for us. And I think sometimes in his goodness and his grace, he allows things to then happen as a consequence of that. If what we're seeking is something other than him first, those things might fulfill in the short term, but they never fulfill long term. So whether that's status, money, or just staying busy with the wrong things, or things that are good, but maybe not God's best for us, he allows some of that. And I think in his grace and goodness, eventually he's all right, do you get it now? And okay, Lord, I forgot. I'm coming back. Right.
I think, just to kind of hit on the point, I do think, a lot of us are either feelings led and logic led. And you more than me, are more logic. I'm a thinker. If I get an idea and I get excited about it, I'm going to think through all of it. I'm going to plan it out and process it and strategize it. That's actually one of my strengths, is strategy. And so I do that really well. I'm God, this was a gift from you. I'm just going to do it without you though. And so I do think that. And so I think just allow it, just taking that space, okay, God, what do you have for me? And then again, this is just a practice that we have to practice when we find ourselves. Really, we should be doing this all the time with everything. But when you find yourself in these big, kind of scary, hairy moments of your livelihood, your business, your purpose, your all the things, it's if we'll just ask and then slow down, don't ask and then start scrolling social media. It's ask and then just sit, hang out with God for a little bit and see what he says. So first thing we're going to do is seek God. The next thing that we are going to do is seek counsel. When you're faced with, again, not all pivots need to be big pivots. Some of them are turns. Some of them are even planned or predicted in some way. But I do think that it is very wise for us to invite, like, not make isolated decisions, especially if y'all are like me. I'm, I have a team of five, like, there's five of us. So I'm not just making decisions based on myself. So I need to seek counsel as I'm kind of approaching, like, hey, this machine is running well. And just to be real hot with y'all, as the young pastors say nowadays, open, honest, and transparent. Like, the machine is running well. The girls are killing it. Everything's going great. But the way that we have it structured right now, it's all just maintaining itself. So most of my income comes from any series that I teach, which is less and less these days because I'm putting that into the hands of my girls, and from retreats. So when I removed some retreats from my schedule, it became very blatantly obvious. And this is when I reached out to Nick and said, hey, this is where I'm at. Like, this is, like, when I've got retreats on the books and we've got, income coming in, that it's great. But I wasn't as fully aware until I kind of had those scales moved of like, hey, we're not in the negative. Like, I'm not at the point where I'm paying to keep the studio open, but it is very much neutralizing itself. What do I do? Like, what pivot do I do? I mean, we can go hard pivot and say, you guys just teach for yourselves. I'm going to run my own thing. I'm going to pay less rent and make more money and not have to do all these other things. Or is it just a tiny tweak in their compensation plan, right? Just having that one conversation with someone who knows business, who does business, that we know each other very well, just seeking counsel of someone else who can speak into it, who's not as close to it. Cause I'm like, this is my baby. These are my girls. These are my students. These are my people. Yeah. And you got to eat. So like, I need someone who maybe is a little more logical than I am looking at this thing, who can speak into that.
It's really important to have someone that you can talk to, someone who, I would say, if it's business related, again, this could be totally not business related. This could be, hey, I'm on the worship team at church and I'm feeling like it's time to take some time off. Like, it could be anything, but let's for a moment talk a little bit more specifically about business. And I think where a lot of people find themselves, and this isn't just yoga teachers, this is just any kind of freelancer or someone who kind of goes out on their own and makes their own business, you will likely find yourself in a point where you didn't set up a compensation structure for yourself. And especially if you're starting to build a team, if you have any kind of overhead because you have rent or other expenses that are fixed, everyone else might be making money but you. And so even if the business is doing well, what you're doing is working, I use air quotes because it's really not working, but what we need to look at is your compensation plan and the work that you're doing in your business. So I think there's probably two conversations here. There's one, if you're still kind of like the solopreneur that doing stuff on your own versus I have a team or I'm building a team. Either way, you need to pay yourself. The business needs to be paying you for what you're doing. And so if you're a solopreneur, here are some things that will help you kind of think through as you're growing. And even if you don't build a team, at some point you might want at least like an assistant or something. But what you need to do is look at, what are all the roles that I fill in my business? So not necessarily like, hey, I need to find a new one of me, because what you do is a lot. And to replace you is probably like 3 or 4 people. So what you need to do is take a step back and go, what are the roles that I'm filling right now? So I do like admin, bookkeeping kind of stuff. There's like the admin side of things, scheduling, cleaning, like kind of studio management sort of things. And then the actual teaching. So like you can compartmentalize, what are the different roles that I fill? What would it cost to pay somebody to do those things realistically? And about how many hours do I do those things? Like, yeah, this is a lot of work. You might actually have to track the hours you put in, but like, do this work. If you want to build a business, get serious about it. Put in some time to start tracking some stuff, to at least put some numbers on this. And then you'll know, can I afford to pay someone to do this? And if the answer is no, well, I'm doing that. Well, I should get paid for that too. And start blocking these things out and say, for this role, I put in this much time, I need to pay myself like this for these things. And then as you grow, then you can start to say, all right, so now I need to bring someone in to do this piece. And here's what I can expect to pay them. when you do this and have actual numbers, even if in the beginning, and you probably won't have enough money to pay yourself for all the work that you're doing. Like realistically, you just won't. If you don't do this planning, you will not price things in a way to make yourself, to give yourself the margin to then do this in the future without being in this position of where there's no margin.
Yeah.
You are building a business, and that business should be paying you some kind of profit. And like, I could do a whole nother episode. We say this all the time, so I'll make a note. We should do another episode just on this topic of paying yourself first, this concept of profit first, where you build in these numbers in the beginning, price things in a way to pay for all this stuff so that you have an actual business and that you didn't just create a job where you're working more hours for less money for no time off. That's where I found myself. Again, I'm speaking from experience. I built my own job that I really didn't like. I didn't like what I'd built. And I had to figure out what to do differently. And this was a big piece of that, of what all am I doing? What do I need to be charging for this to even be worth it? And then do I even want to do that? Maybe the answer is no. I'm like, you know what? My heart's not in this anymore. I'm done. And that's a hard conversation to have with yourself, or hopefully with a trusted person.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was great. So when I reached out, you gave me these things to think about. And that kind of leads us into our next point, which is to get brutally gut level honest with where I find myself in that. So when you said, you gave me just some things to think about, I had to really sit and assess. Like, of course, for me, like building organically, which is how I have done my business, all of my businesses, you're going to have those moments. And that's why we want to have this conversation, because you may be on your own right now, but like in 2 years, you may have a team of 4 other teachers that you have with you. And if you can do these things now, because I didn't set, like what Nick was saying, is like the profit first and things like that. It's like, you're right. I should have done that back then so that I wouldn't find myself here now, but I do find myself here now. And the beautiful thing is, I'm going to stay flexible and fun, and I'm going to make the changes I need to moving forward. But I have to, this is our third point, assess honestly where I'm at and say, okay, where am I at? What's working? What's not? How long am I willing to stay here? Right? Because some things don't need to pivot right then. Like I may look at, okay, starting Q1, I'm going to change the structure of these things. Right? So this is giving me time to slow my car down, put my blinker on, make that turn, make that pivot. But as I'm assessing some of the things that, I sought counsel for and coaching on, I'm assessing it and thinking, yes, there are some things that I need to change moving forward. It's hard to, like, I think personally, to come face to face with that reality. You know what I mean? Because again, it kind of goes back into like the fear of the unknown. What if I change the compensation plan and they quit? And what if? And to me, where I'm at in this assessment, honestly, personally, right now, real time, is what if? Like, I'm just going to let myself go there and I'm going to play it out a couple different ways and decide I'm going to make this change regardless. And that's a really hard place to be, because I know that anytime we make changes, it changes things. And some of us, myself included, don't always do well with change, especially when we have all these other changes happening outside of our business, right? So that's our third point. We're going to seek God, seek counsel, and assess honestly where we are and how long we're willing to stay there or how long we need to stay there. So my pivot that we talked about in prior podcasts is it changed quick, because I kind of got up on that point where I was like, this is not working. Something has to change. So right now, Kristen is telling that Kristen, build this in. When you make this change, build this in now, because if I'd done this 2 years ago, I may not find myself here, right? And there's no shame. Like I'm doing the best I can with what I have. I'm building a team. I'm doing all these other things that I've never done before. And if I had done this work on the front end, I wouldn't be here maybe as intensely as I am. And again, it's not quite as intense as before, but I now recognize, like when we're talking about indicators of a pivot, I'm recognizing these signs, these patterns, right?
Yeah, just something to add there, that until the pain of changing is less than the pain of staying the same, it's going to be pretty hard to make changes. So a lot of times that's where you'll finally feel that like, all right, something's got to give. I've got to make a change. Before that, you'll probably have the thought or the idea that like, you know what, this probably isn't working. But until that pain is big enough to push you to move, even if it's painful to stay where you're at, until when you think about the pain of changing and it's like, oh, that's way worse, you're like, let's be real, you're not going to make a change. I mean, you could, you probably won't.
And that's the hope, is that, you do feel that pain and you allow that pain to be a teacher and allow it to be a strength builder, because today Kristen is approaching what might be a pivot a lot different than, oh my gosh, this is heavy. This is, I can't get this bar back up, right? Like I'm in the bottom of my squat and I'm maxed out. Like I cannot get the bar back up. How can I approach it differently? And I think this is a sign of growth, I think. And so hopefully, if you have to get there, you get there, but hopefully we can avoid getting to the very max level of our pain. And again, that pain tolerance is going to be different for everybody. I tend to avoid discomfort and pain. I say that as a joke, but really I do. Like, that's why I'm so strong in strategy. I'm like, how can I get to this in the most cushy, comfy way possible? And, reality is that's not always the case. So
Something that I've said with you in the multiple times that we've had conversations around pivoting your business is that the severity of the pain will dictate the timing of the change. So if the pain you're feeling is like, I just can't do this anymore, like I'm about to crash and burn and this whole ship is going down unless I make a change. So because this is a question some people have, like, well, I know I need to change this, but I don't know when. Like, when's the right time? This is your answer. The severity of your pain will determine how soon. So if it's something you're like, you know what, like I could keep going like this for a quarter. Okay, well, maybe this is a next quarter change. If like, I can't do this another day, like you need to send in messages tomorrow. Hey, effective immediately, this is what's changing. And if it's somewhere in between, just use your judgment. Like, you know what, I could go the rest of the month. This is going to be a beginning of the next month kind of change. So little tidbit there that you can use to help figure out like when's the right time to make the change.
yeah, that's really, really good. And I think, like you said, like both happen, and both have happened to me, both happened to us. We've made quick changes and then planned changes, right? Like, and this one feels different. Feels like I have a little more control of it. I'm aware of it. I feel like God's kind of moving some stuff in me, preparing me, whatever that is. And so for me, like if we're assessing honestly, I can go another quarter like this. I can pre-plan the pivot, if you will, right? So I love that, because we don't have to get there. We don't have to, like, I'm not there where I'm like, the whole ship is going to sink. No, it's not. Before it was, but right now it's not. And that's why I think it's so important to assess honestly after you have sought counsel and they've brought some new thoughts to you to kind of sit with.
And I would say too that with seeking counsel and assessing and all this, that there's this saying I've heard before, and it's not necessarily for the situation, but I would say pain is pain, and pain divided. No, what does I say? Pain shared is pain divided. And I think that even relates here with like getting counsel, and sometimes just bringing someone else into the discussion can talk you back off the ledge. Like you're about to jump and before you got a parachute, and hey, maybe you don't need to jump. Let's talk this out with someone who's objective. They're not feeling all the emotional stuff that you're feeling, and it might not be as severe as you think it is, or it might be. And you might get confirmation like you got to make a change or you're going to be in the psych ward tomorrow.
Yeah.
So just having that objective third party can be really helpful, just from someone who's trusted and who won't just tell you, they won't sugarcoat things, and they won't just tell you what you want to hear, because that's not helpful.
And I know for us, even in our history of businesses together and separate and all of that, there are those times where you have said, back up from the ledge. And then there's other times where you're like, here's a life jacket, put that on before you jump, like, and so it's like, yeah, make the jump, but get some kind of flotation device around you to properly land. But I love that. So we're going to seek God, seek counsel, assess honestly. And then for me, and Nick, feel free to add what you think here. In my line of thinking, I would go to the tribe. I would consult with my team. After I've consulted with God, after I've consulted with a third party, after I've consulted with self and assessed, I'm now going to go to the team and say, here's where we are. I want it to be it may not be fully 100% unanimous. Like, I'm not naive enough to believe that that's ever going to be the case, but I want to present this to you. Here's where we're at. Here is where I feel like we're going, where I feel like God is leading us. Go. Like, put what input do you have? And then at that point, your team may say, I want to start teaching more so I can bring in more revenue to the business, or I want to increase my prices, or I'm going to jump my number from 10 to 15, as a minimum or whatever. Or they may say, what you're offering or what you're suggesting isn't for me. And that's okay. But I think bringing it to them and saying, before it starts to leak into your members, which is our next step, we're going to consult with the team before we consult with members, right? And brainstorm. And I think as a leader, this is pretty important because you're inviting them to collectively make some decisions on the behalf of the unit as a whole, but they also are empowered to make decisions for themselves and how they want to show up. Do I want to do more, teach more, bring in more, or hey, this is no longer working for me? But they can't know that. And so what I'm not going to do is consult with God, consult with counsel, consult myself, and then say, hey guys, this is what we're doing. And then feel like they're getting hit with a baseball bat, right? Like, of just like whiplash. And I want them to be a part of this mission, because for me, my teachers are my priority, and everything that they do is going to flow from that. So that for me, Nick, would be the next, like, consult with the team. Do you feel like that's kind of the right area? Like, if we were just having a conversation on Voxer instead of here?
Yes. And my advice would change based on what change you're planning to make. So here I would say this, I don't have a witty saying, it maybe just come out, but the severity of the change will dictate the conversation you need to have.
Yeah.
So if it's something like, I need to change your compensation plan, that's a serious discussion to have. And you don't want to just willy-nilly walk into it and be like, what do you think, teacher? Should I pay you less money? What are they going to say? No. But if you come at it with, guys, I've been doing an evaluation and like what we're doing just isn't working, like leading with some of the heart behind it all, that, I love what we are about and the people that we're trying to help, and, whatever, kind of set the vision again, like reset the vision, recast the vision, because vision leaks. And I've been doing an honest assessment, and like, this just isn't working anymore because the only one making money is the studio, and I'm not. And it could be that just to the point, or, the language can change. Your team better than I do, but you could essentially say something's got to change because this isn't working. So it's either we make these changes together or it goes away.
Yeah.
So when you're faced with that, you're like, okay, like, I see where this is going. I've been a part of other businesses as an employee or a contractor, like when COVID hit, and they were making cuts and changes and even altering their salaries, even from the top down. Sometimes you got to make changes to help the business make it through certain seasons. And those were very difficult conversations they had. But sometimes it's like, it's either this or this whole thing crashes and burns. So like, we're all in this together to make sure we figure out something that works. So that, at least setting the stage to then have the conversation, what could we change in order to make this work? You could either pitch like, here are some options, and discuss the options. And then you can say, and if you have other ideas, I'm open to other ideas.
Yeah. So you're saying like it would have at least a couple of things as options for them to talk through, and then open the floor for any other suggestions. It's kind of like asking a toddler, like, do you want broccoli or do you want a carrot? Right? Like, you're kind of,
Or
and
pizza.
Yeah, right. And so I do think it's important because they may be thinking of something that I'm not thinking of. And honestly, this is a new place for me. Like, before, when I pivoted, it was me, and then like I was bringing one other teacher in. So it wasn't as magnified. I think I didn't feel this like burden. So for me to even potentially think about changing their compensation plan, that's something I have never approached in business to date. of saying, we potentially need to do this, or we potentially may need to do that. You know what I mean? And then there's other options, obviously, different locations. So our cost of doing business goes down, or we take away a scheduling system and we change and go the free route or whatever. Like there are so many other options than just sink or swim. But you're saying have some of those, bring to the table. Let's discuss them and then share any other ideas that maybe I'm not thinking through. And then hopefully they will feel more empowered. Like it's not just one person dictating all of it. Obviously, I have the final say and I have, all of that, but I'm not exercising that in the sense of like control. It's more like I want you guys to be a part of this conversation and these decisions because it affects you. It actually affects you probably more than it affects me because they are the ones that, are benefiting the most from the studio, which is what I want. And I also want to make sure that I am getting compensated for the work that I'm doing that's unseen and all of that. So that's good.
If it's a smaller change, you might not need to have that big of a discussion. It might just be, hey guys, like here's the heart behind it. Here, I need to make this change. This thing isn't really working anymore. Here's what we're going to do instead. It might not even be a give me your thoughts and ideas. It might just be communicating what's changing. This is more for the bigger stuff. And I also would throw in some things that maybe you considered that aren't good options so that they know too, like I've really thought through this. We could do this, but here are my concerns with that. We could do this. For example, if financially it's just not working, you have several levers you could pull. As I was discussing this with Kristen, I could change the pricing that we're charging. That's a good way to increase revenue. I could lower the cost of operating, which you had mentioned, which might be a combination of things. Those are two really big levers. And it might be changing the compensation plan. Any of those things could help with that. So it's just then discussing, this is the direction I need to head. Here's what I'm considering. What do you guys think? And I don't know if it's a group meeting, because that can sometimes be awkward, especially if different people are compensated different ways, or if you have individual meetings with each person that might dictate the conversations that you have. Just things to consider with how big your team is. Just reflecting on the conversation that I had with you and that others might find themselves in as you price what you price and just find yourself like, I'm just not making enough money, or everyone else is making money but me, which is a common thing in business because you never did this before, right? You didn't know what you didn't know. But you need to build in the cost of these different roles that right now you're performing because you're doing the work and it's going to cost you money to pay someone else to do that work. So another way to approach the compensation plan conversation is it doesn't have to just be, hey, I'm going to pay you less money, because that's an awkward conversation to have. Another way to approach this would be, hey, I have real costs associated with running the studio that right now are not being factored into the way that we run our compensation. And so percentage wise, I'm not changing your compensation, but we need to factor in some costs of doing business before your percentage kicks in. So what your thing looked like before is, hey teacher, for every series that you run, you get X% of whatever comes in. And then the studio, gets this other percent. That doesn't have to change. What you may have to do is say, it's not just top line revenue and rent for your class. It might be top line revenue, rent, and a third line that has just like studio overhead or like extra costs. So all those other jobs that you're doing, billing, all the stuff that you do that you're not being paid for, that needs to be like, that's why you need to put pricing around it so that you can figure out, hey, I've got this monthly cost that if I was paying someone else to do this, it would cost me this. Now let's take that chunk, let's divide it out by the different offerings that we have. And now the offerings have to share that overhead load. And that's a great way to start to change the compensation plan without really changing the compensation plan. Think through that, have some actual numbers and reasons behind this, and really, think on that, the wording that you use too, that can make a big difference.
The next thing that I would do is, so after we consult with the team, we're just like, have some of these conversations, we make a decision. Then we're going to consult with members and maybe we don't know the decision, but it's kind of like, how are things working for you guys, right? Like, and I'm not sure, like I've done like some, alignment surveys, like feedback surveys and things like that, just to hear from them. But what, at what point and what level do we consult with members?
This one is a little harder to answer with an exact answer because I think it kind of depends on the change. If it's just financial, like, hey, I just need to charge more. Because that honestly, that's where a lot of people find themselves probably is like, I am not charging enough for this to be worth it. And like that might be the only thing that needs to change. I just need to charge more. I think that conversation is different. And maybe that isn't even taken to them. You just announce like, hey, price change. Like, I mean, that's just a normal part of business.
Yeah.
If it's I'm changing what I'm offering, that I think that's where it probably makes a little bit more sense to bring in the community, whether it's messaging individual people or conversations in person, which that's probably better conversations in person because there's less things to construe and misinterpret versus like text or whatever. But versus like a town hall kind of meeting, I'm not sure everyone's gathered around like, hey guys, that could be more of a off the cuff, like, hey, I've been thinking about our offerings and what we do. Like, what do you guys love about it? Like, kind of just asking open ended questions to get them talking versus short, like, yes or no kind of answers. Cause you get a lot more out of asking the open ended questions versus like, hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? Like, yes or no? Like, I mean, that can be helpful if you've already kind of made up your mind. But if you're wanting true feedback and thoughts of like, what do you love about this place? And like, what could be better? More of on the feedback side of things. I think that could be helpful, especially as you're early on processing, this isn't working. I think I need to change things. Maybe especially with like low attendance, this would be a great place to get more feedback from your community. Maybe if it's like, I just want to offer like a new offering, that could be a great thing. That's an easier pivot because like you try something new and I don't think like that's as big of a deal, but taking things away or like changing from membership to non-membership, that's a major change. I think you got to be careful with that. With you did that pivot with your experience in that. Like, how do you think it would have went if you would have polled the group before? Because I my gut feeling is it probably wouldn't have went well. It could have created all sorts of like like talking and problems.
I think too much chatter can make confusion. So I was just thinking through like, if I didn't have a team, would I go straight to the people, right? Like, or where would this step come in? No, I agree. I think if you invite too many voices in, it's confusing. Like it can just add confusion if you're already kind of not super clear on your next steps and things like that. And so you're right. I mean, I may have had a couple of like side conversations like before and after class, or just like, but I think where I'm at now is different than where it was because the people coming into the studio, there are people that come to my studio that don't even know I exist. And that's great. Like that's totally fine. So if I go to them and say, hey, you know what I mean? So it's just a different conversation. So I mean, if I didn't have teachers, this would be a conversation between me and the students. But it's like, how much do I share? Like, do I just say, hey, this is where I'm at? Like kind of that same conversation, but maybe not quite as transparent, like just, hey, this is where we're at. Some things need to change so that we can keep things going, keep the wheels on the bus. I'm thinking about adding these classes. I'm thinking about replacing these classes with these things. What are your thoughts on that? And I think inviting them into this conversation, especially again, if you don't have a team, like it's now just you and the people you serve, I think that they do acknowledge, or I think should be able to be a part of that conversation. However, when I'm thinking through my the boat is about to sink pivot, I'm like, I didn't ask collectively. You know what I mean? Like I just kind of like had a couple side conversations maybe with some of my like veteran people. But other than that, like I just made the decision and that was the next step is to make the changes. Right. And I just did it because my back was against the wall at that time of like this boat will sink if I don't make these changes. So I did, as their leader, make those changes on their behalf and lost a lot of people that never came back. And I've gained a whole lot of new ones. So
I think, again, a lot of the answers to these questions is the severity of your issue will determine the answer to this. So in this case, like you said, ship's going down, like I need to make this change, I wouldn't even consult them unless. So if you have some of those ride or die people, like I'm sure all of you have at least one or two people who just like they love you and they do anything that you do. They're like, sign me up. People who you feel a little bit more of that close connection, that you could be a little bit more open and honest, and you trust that they wouldn't like gossip and like start a big firestorm. I would say you could give them a little insight of like what's going on. But I would say at the end of the day, most of the time, I wouldn't consult with your audience, except for more of like getting feedback. Like I like the feedback thought, but you really got to take even feedback and surveys and stuff. You really got to take that with a grain of salt, because people will tell you, "Yeah, I would love that, and I would totally come if you offered it at this time."
Huh.
And then you offer it, and then they don't show up.
Crickets.
I mean, how often do you see this? We have coaching clients we're talking through this with, that be careful. I mean, yeah, they say they want a Monday, Wednesday, Friday at all these times. And then what happens? They don't show up.
You show up Monday, Wednesday, Friday and pay the rent for the place and they don't show up. No, it's every yoga teacher who's been teaching regularly for a while is like shaking their head. Yes. Like we've heard the echoes of, I'll be there. This is what I want. This is what I want. We've supply and demand. They demanded it. We supplied it and they forgot to show up. So that's a whole nother situation, conversation, but it's so true. We're all like, felt that one. So the next thing would be, once you kind of come up with your next step, your plan, here's what we're going to do. We're going to change locations, or we're going to increase rates, or we're going to change the schedule, whatever that is. I think this is part of the pivot process that matters so much. As a leader, how and when we communicate these changes. I think this was big for me. I remember, and I want you to kind of talk maybe your side of it, but I remember whenever I wrote my email or whatever I was sending out to everybody to say, hey, we're changing directions, we're adding a location, we're taking these classes and memberships away. This is what I have to serve now. Like, it's going to look different. It's going to feel different, whatever. Here it is. And I remember you messaged, I was like, okay, what do you think about this? I'm about to send this out. And you're like, I just feel like I read an entire apology letter. Like, I felt like you were very apologetic in your communication, just in the background of what you're saying. And I think I didn't even know it. I didn't feel it. And I think part of it is just my empathy. Like, I want to serve these people. I want to protect this space for them. Like, that's my job as their leader. And how can I communicate this information concisely and clearly? Like, short and sweet with enough details, but also just, hey, my phone's open. If you need to text me or call me, let's have a conversation, without so many details. And this has really changed. I think that moment actually changed a lot of the way I communicate even today, verbally and especially written. It's like, I'll write something and I'm like, how can I make this smaller but still to the point? So there's no ambiguity, but like, it's just quick and easy to receive. So I think trying to decide, do I leak this information like slowly? Do I drip the information, or do I just all in one letter, here's the changes? And I think that, again, there's so many variables at play, but those are some things to consider as you're working on communicating. You want to do it consistently, clearly, effectively. Like, you don't want to tell one person one thing and it cause all those confusion. Like, it's the same verbiage, the same thing across the board. And I do think that this is a kind of a make or break in our pivot, so to speak. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So a few thoughts, just like you were saying, when it's yours and sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees and everything is so emotionally tied to what you're doing, we can feel so scared and afraid, and we kind of feel like we have to explain why we're changing these things. And that's what happened with you, where you were like just really trying to explain all the details, like why it's not working and like why it has to change. And some of that might be okay, but a lot of it just sends this message that you're not confident, you're not sure you're making the right choice, and you're afraid of offending people, and you're afraid of losing people. And those are real fears. Like,
I'm like, all of those things were true. But I don't have to
And
communicate that.
right. And that I feel like that will scare more people off than just clear, concise, and direct wording. And so, and I would say write your message, doesn't have to be email, write your message the way you think you want to share it. Maybe go through a few and come at it later. So like write it maybe the next day when you've got a fresh day, a fresh perspective, a fresh night's sleep, hopefully. Sometimes, I don't know, when in these seasons you don't sleep well, but come at it with at least a fresh set of eyeballs and edit it, try to cut it down, but get it to a point where you can send it to someone else who you trust. Again, this trusted advisor, trusted friend, someone who is objective that can at least just see like, hey, this sounds way too apologetic. Try to cut that out, and don't be so afraid of offending people or losing people. Like it's gonna happen. Like you are gonna lose some people, but hear me when I say this: it's the wrong people. And we're going to get flack every time we mention like the right people and the wrong people. We get comments like, we're supposed to be inclusive and whatever else you're going to say, Karen. Like, go ahead and tell me, because it helps the algorithm when we get engagement. But, but there are people that you're called to serve who are a great fit for your passion, for your communication style, for your teaching style. And there are people who just aren't a good fit. Those people are going to be the ones who leave. And what's going to happen is they're going to make room for more of the right people, for more of the people that God has called you to lead. Let me phrase it that way. That's a little less offensive, right? It'll make more room for those people to get on your bus.
I hope that someone listened to that one point and like felt like a revival in their heart for how, they're facing this right now. They're saying like, my ship is sinking. But like you just gave them language to wrap around, like all of these things. And I think that in itself, like it changed so much for me. Like I hope that it changed so much for them.
And if it's financially related, which a lot of times it is, that even more fuels that fear inside. Like, I don't want to lose people. Like, I need the revenue. I don't want to lose them. I promise you, the people who leave over the money need to get out, because it'll make room again, not for just the emotional side of things and the emotional connection. You've seen this probably in your hair business. Everywhere that I've done this, I feel like I have to be too, like, I don't want to offend anybody, so I'm just going to say it. The cheaper people, the people who want to pay less money, are a bigger pain in the butt and hard to work with versus people who, the high dollar people. And I see this in my video business with clients, and it's nothing against them personally. It's just the part of business where cheaper people are just they just are. They're harder to please, that have higher expectations,
More
and
entitled.
they're just annoying versus the high ticket client who might just be like, okay, how do I pay?
And I know like this can be a personal thing. Like I know my worth. I know what my time is worth. I know my value that I bring. A lot of people don't. And so they will tend to allow some of these people who, like, I would never like just go to somebody and be like, can you just give me like a friend and family discount? Like, of course, like some of that naturally happens, right? Like my friend is also my hairdresser and she comes to yoga and I do like all of that. So like, obviously, but like I would never devalue somebody by saying like, you might say, I can't afford that. And that's a me thing. Like I can't afford to participate in these classes, but that's not a you thing. That's not a value of what this person is bringing. The problem with some people who are unwilling to pay good money for quality services is they don't recognize the value of what they're getting. Right. And so it is hard. That's really, I do want to kind of like hop in and say like, I know, like, and I have no problem charging what I'm worth and all of those things. But I haven't always been that way, and not everybody else is that way. So I just want to free you in that way of saying, if someone is unwilling to pay what you know you're worth plus a tax, or if they're asking for free things or free classes, let the Lord bless them somewhere else, right? Like it may be time. And now there are times, obviously, that I feel led to let this person come in and whatever. Like there are those times. But if your client base is mad about you increasing your rates by $5 or $10 or whatever, And I had to do this. You're right. In hair, I had to do this. And when I upped my rates and I lowered my availability hours, I fell in love with doing what I did because it gave me so much more freedom. I enjoyed what I was doing again. I wasn't working as many hours. I was making more money and I just loved it. And I apply the same principle to my yoga business right now. Right.
So just to add on to that, practically speaking, if you have fewer people paying more money, and then that makes room for more new people to come in paying more money, in the end, you're going to make more money. You probably will have a short-term hit. So just expect that. Okay, I might lose a few people, but the ones who are staying are paying more. This is if we're changing our rates. And then the new people coming in will pay the new rate. You're going to make more money in the end, but there might be a short period of time where you're not. So one, either plan for that financially and save a little bit of extra money for that cushion. Again, this goes back to our profit first, our cash flow conversation, which we should probably have an episode on that to talk more details on that. But set aside some money, some cushion for this couple months that might be a little slow or might be off. And then the last thing I want to share about communication is you're going to have to send it more than once and send it in more than one place if you have that access. So I don't know what you guys have, if you have an email list and if you can do like SMS, like text messages or like the Remind app or something like that. Social media, like you need to communicate this message in multiple places and more than one time because people aren't going to see it.
That's good. And I would even say from the mat, like after classes are over and you're doing end of class announcement. Hey, don't forget to check your email. I sent out some things. We've got some changes coming up January 1st. You're not going to want to miss that. Just verbally communicating it. That's really good.
Okay. A third little extra piece for the communication, that leading with how this benefits them. And this is really communication across the board. Anything. If you're writing web pages and social media, just anything. If you can lead with how it benefits them, it really frames the rest of the conversation that like, yeah, I'm making this change because I need to, and this is what I need to do in order for this to work. But this isn't just for me. Here's how you benefit. Like this will enable me to bless you in these ways. And if you can lead with that really lowers their defenses too and helps them hear what else you have to say.
Yeah, that's really good. And kind of going back to what you said about there may be that gap of where some people are getting off the bus and there may be a little bit of that in between space before the next set of people that you have been called to lead get on the bus. That's kind of leading us into our last point is just trust the process. Like have confidence. If you don't have confidence in yourself, at least have confidence in what you feel like God is leading you, where you feel like God is leading you, and what He has spoken to you. If you can't trust yourself and did I make the right decision? Am I going to run everybody off? All the things, at least trust God and that what He spoke to you and what He has shown you through this and what He wants to do through you through this or in you through this, trust that. And that's a piece that I feel like I kind of tagged on as I was making these notes for myself, like just kind of thinking through coaching myself through this is as I take the next step or make these pivots or whatever, even if I'm not feeling fully confident and I am a little in the background apologetic about it and I'm not really sure and I may not be communicating it properly, do I still trust God? Do I still trust that He is pursuing me? He is blessing me. He is calling me this way. And that's an answer that I can say, yes, I'm going to trust you in this. I'm going to take these steps. Lord, if I'm taking the steps the wrong way, reroute me, right? And like teach me what I can while I'm here. Strengthen me in the process, give me courage, all of those things. But trust the process. Trust that what you're doing, and this is part of building confidence as a leader and building just a consistent connection with yourself, even of just doing these little things or big things, and then trusting that process. And maybe reshape or reframe the thought instead of like, what's the worst that can happen? What's the best that can happen? Like, let yourself just sit in how could this work well? And like, let your body feel what that is and then trust that that's where God is leading you.
Yeah, and the Bible is full of scriptures. We could probably spend like half an hour like talking through all the scriptures about like trusting God. But I mean, Jesus himself in Matthew 6, like 25 through 34 in that chunk, we're saying like, don't worry about everyday life, whether you have enough food or drink, whether you have enough clothes to wear. He says like God takes care of the birds. They don't store up in barns, although they do nestle some things away, I think. And the squirrels definitely hide acorns everywhere, but still like God provides for them and God will provide for you. How much more does he care about you than squirrels and birds, right? Like a lot.
Okay.
And so just trust that God will take care of you and look back on your life and think of actual real examples of hard stuff that you've been through and how you made it through. God helped pull you through and just draw on that confidence that you can figure this out too.
So I want to leave you with a couple of questions that I personally asked myself. So this is your time if you're not driving and you can safely maybe take notes. I have 3 questions that I asked myself that I'm going to ask you, just some practical things. So we now have recognized like, okay, here's the indicators that it's time for a pivot. Here's the steps we're going to take as we pivot, right? And now I want you to just kind of reflect on these questions that I asked myself that I'm going to turn around and ask you. And I want you just to write them down and write down any notes or anything that's highlighted for you. The first question is, what was working that's no longer working? What was working that's no longer working? Some things that I wrote underneath as just little side notes, season of life changes. When I started teaching yoga, my kids were babies. They're now in a very different season. I have an almost driver. My littlest turns a whole decade old tomorrow. My baby turns 10 tomorrow. So we're just very much in a different season of life. So I need to reflect, does what I'm doing in this capacity still serve this season of my life? Does it still fit? The next thing is financial changes. Hello, has anybody bought milk or gas lately? Okay, so everything has gone up. And we all know this. Every single thing in our life has gone up. So that in itself, if nothing else changed, if I didn't have major disasters to my home, if I didn't have an injury with hospital bills, if I didn't have all of these other life things, 2 funerals to pay for, right? Like on top of just life got more expensive, financial changes. The next note that I wrote under what was working that may no longer be working is the team. The team has changed. Like when I started, it was just me. And then it was me plus 1 for maybe a year or 2. And now it's me plus 4. That changes things financially. And it makes me have to kind of reevaluate.
And I think to add on to the team changes, maybe we just say team and or business changes, that when you started, it was just you. And now there's other things to consider. There's just more expenses. There's a higher cost of doing business. So it could be team or just business changes that are prompting this change. And then another one that I added to your list was maybe you have new or different desires or dreams that when you first started, you had a certain dream or desire, and over life, like we change, and sometimes our dreams and our desires change. And I
And
think
that's
that's
not
okay.
wrong. Yeah.
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 But it can be hard sometimes to be honest with ourselves. Be like, you know what? I used to want this and I don't anymore. Now I want something else. And that could be a totally like, I don't want to teach yoga anymore. That's a big change. Or it could be, I don't want to teach yoga in this way anymore. Or I don't love doing charity. I love my seniors and I wish I could keep doing this, but my heart is not in chair yoga. It's in this other stuff. And like that can be a really hard change to make when you still love the people that you're helping. You just need to serve them in another way. Or maybe you need to bring someone else in to serve them and you're letting go of that. Like whatever the pivot is, it dictates the differences there. But
Yeah, I think that's really good. And it is hard to maybe acknowledge that, but it kind of goes back to honestly assessing and just being okay with the answer. Like, I used to love teaching this type of class, or I used to love teaching yoga only, and now I love teaching other things. And I can't just keep adding, right? Like, I have to, it's okay for me to want to express this calling that I feel like I have differently. And it's okay if that disappoints people.
I just had another thought. It could be physical changes. You might have changes in your body due to an accident, due to an illness, due to just aging. Like You maybe used to be a power girl and you just can't do what you used to do. That actually could be a great way to help other people just like you who are also experiencing those kind of changes, hormonal changes. Like there's a lot that goes on. Perimenopausal women experience a lot of difficulties, and that you going through that can be like turn your pain to purpose. That could be your next kind of season or calling of like who it is that you're trying to serve.
I love that. And actually, that's something I feel pretty passionate about personally that I didn't think I would. I mean, when I was 30 starting this, like, like that wasn't even a thing. But as I get closer to that, like perimenopausal age, it's like I want to help women thrive and not just barely get by like our grandmamas used to. You know what I mean? Like I feel passionate about that. And that's not something I'm moving into yet, but like I can feel that increase of like, I want to thrive and I want to help people. And it's okay if that changes. And yes, I'm going to disappoint some people who have gotten this version of me, this non-perimenopausal version of me, right? But I'm also going to help some other women who are like, I had no idea that I could be okay and I could navigate this season of life. So I think it's awesome that you added that because that hadn't even come to my mind before right now. And the second question that I have for me and for you is what part of you is the problem? So when I ask myself this, what part of me is the problem? What I wrote down was a couple of things just to evaluate: mindset and fear. Am I being closed-minded? Am I, again, just too close to it to see any other options outside of black or white, right? Like there's so many other colors in that. As a hairstylist, I can tell you there's a lot of colors between the highest level of blonde and the darkest level of black. There's so many colors. And so what part of me is the problem? So is it my mindset and fear? Is it consistency? Is it just, I haven't given this thing time? Like I need to see it through, or I need to show up consistently as a leader in my business. Like, am I just not being consistent enough? Is it my time and energy management? Outside influence? Who am I allowing to speak into me that may be causing me to be a problem in my business as a leader, and vice versa? Like who is speaking well into me? So your outside influence, what you're intaking digitally and audibly and all of that, personal and professional habits. Like I mentioned earlier in this podcast, like I have been sensing like a higher amount of anxiety in my body just the last couple of days. It's been super noticeable. And I'm doing kind of all the same things. I'm still training. I'm still, my water intake has been a little bit low, but other than that, like a whole lot hasn't changed other than I've introduced coffee back into my regular regimen in the mornings. So what personal habits do I need to address that might be a part of the problem, right? Am I going to bed too late and am I not spending enough time on my computer or whatever that is? That for me, like I need to sit with that.
Yeah. Are you sitting there scrolling your phone late at night and that blue light's hitting your eyes and then you're not sleeping well? I mean, like there's so many things that contribute if energy is part of the
It
problem.
translates from our personal habits into our professional habits. Like if I don't have the capacity to even sit and think about these things or listen to this podcast or have these conversations because I'm so maxed out with junk food, digital media stuff, you know what I mean? Like mental junk food. I don't even have the space to think through it. So of course I'm going to feel overwhelmed and capped out and all of that. The next one I wrote down was self-sabotaging my success. And as I wrote this down, I do feel like it was definitely influenced by the Holy Spirit because I don't know that I would have maybe recognized that in the past. So like I am at a new season of my business. And like when I reached out to Nick, I said, it's working. Like the logistics of it, the team, like culture of the business, we're getting out there. I have given away like, marketing. I just brought on another, so it's like, it's working. I'm just not getting paid. So it's like the machine itself is working. I'm just not getting paid for the work that I'm doing. That's kind of where I find myself. And so am I at a point where I would normally say, not working, and then self-sabotage it because I'm getting to that point where instead of necessarily pivoting, it's really, I just need to see it through and break through where I'm at. Because I'm at this new level that I've never been to before. do I see it through, or am I participating with ideology of letting this thing go completely and sabotaging it, right? Like, am I even entertaining that thought because that feels safe? I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to quit.
A few things can come into play there. One would be I'm afraid of the new level. Like, this is going to require more of me and it's going to require me to level up. I'm going to have to be a leader and learn how to lead people. And like, there's a lot of things that can come up that will hold you back from making this change or this pivot because you feel like maybe you're not good enough, that you're not ready, that you don't have what it takes. And my encouragement to you there is none of us do. We don't. Like, you don't. I always think about this with when I don't want to get political, but like, can you imagine a new president starting like, you are not qualified for the job. You've never been president. How can you be? You have to learn on the job, like how many roles in life do we have that there's just no way to prepare for it. I mean, hopefully what you've been through have kind of prepared you for it, but there's a level of newness and maybe fumbling your way through, making mistakes. Like, that's just a part of it. But the fear of all of that, the fear of it succeeding and like taking you to that next level can sometimes make you stay where you're at because it's more comfortable. If
Yeah.
you know the comfort, even if it's comfortable discomfort. Sometimes we don't want to get off the nail. Have I shared that story? I think I have. Where like a guy's walking by someone's house and there was this dog sitting there on the porch whining, like whimpering, like something's wrong. And the owner was right there on the porch, and the guy walking by says, "Hey, what's wrong with your dog?" He's like, "Oh, he's sitting on a nail." I'm like, why doesn't he get up? Like, because it's going to hurt
Mm.
to get off that nail. Now, in the end, is he going to be better off getting off the nail? Yes.
Yeah.
Is it going to hurt in the moment to get up off the nail? Yes.
Yes.
And is that going to hurt more than it hurts right now? Probably. But get off that nail, rip the Band-Aid off. Like, it's going to get better, but it won't get better until you make that move.
This one was really highlighted for me because I can see that even just in my thought process or my thought patterns of like, this is a good thing. Like, this is a good thing. And think there's a lot that is working well. And I think that to see it through, I'm going to have to grow as a leader. I'm going to have to strengthen that part of my, my leadership muscle, my, all of these things. That sounds exhausting. Or, you know what I mean? Like, that sounds like, do I even have what it takes? Like, do I even, because I don't know. I don't know. I've never been there before. I've never been here before, but I figured it out and lots of grace and lots of, conversations and all of that. But there is something to that of like what you're saying of just the fear of having to become who I need to be in that next season. That is a real fear that I feel like even just in this moment, I'm working through processing real time.
Again, a lot of the stuff I'm sharing because out of my own experience, because I've experienced it. And even if the pivot or the change is just adding a team member, that's one what we haven't mentioned yet. Maybe it's just adding a team member. That's a big change. That's a pivot. And so for me, there was a lot in that like, I'm not a good leader. Like, I don't know anything about managing a team and like leading. And honestly, I know that it's going to be more work than it's going to save in the beginning because I've got to train them and help them get to know how we do things. We're going to need to implement some systems and processes because right now it's just all in my head and I know how I do things. Now I've got to explain all this to someone new. Like, that's a lot of work. I'm not going to lie. It is a lot of work. It's worth it on the other end of it. You just can't skip that part. Like that is a part of it. The other piece that can get in the way with the fear of success. You hear people throw this around and sometimes I'm like, really? But it is a thing. For me, the way that showed up was if I suddenly had a whole bunch of more clients all at once, I couldn't handle it. I don't have enough team and systems in place to handle the influx. So I don't know, you might have to help me kind of bring this home for how this could apply for yoga teachers, but like, what if this change really grows it and I don't have space for the people that this draws in? Like that's a real thing too. Like, I don't know if I could handle it. I don't know if I want to teach more classes. Maybe that's how it shows up for yoga teachers is like,
Yeah.
what if this thing really takes off? And now I'm like,
I
I'm going to
can't
have to find more teachers because I can't handle the workload.
It's a real problem. Like, it's a real thing to fear.
Or I'm going to max out and I'm going to have to find a new space. That takes work. I got to find somewhere else to teach that can fit more mats. And maybe it's going to cost more money. Maybe there's costs involved with updating signs and marketing materials with your address and like Google review. I don't know. Like there's real stuff that could come with that. So I mean, that's how fear of success sometimes can show up. Like if this works and does better, it's going to cause more work.
It's true. It's true. And so I think that self-sabotaging that success is one of the ways to keep ourselves safe and feeling less discomfort around what that might entail. But you're right. Getting off the nail, it is worth it. So yes, it's painful in the front end, but like it is worth it. Like I can tell you standing here, making those, especially those big pivots earlier in my career, it's so worth it. And so it is one of those things where you got to just do it. You just got to get off the nail. I like that.
There's a proverb that's one of my favorite scriptures. And anytime people ask me like, what's your go-to scripture? What's your favorite scripture? People are always expecting like something really deep or emotional, but like you have to know me. That's just not where I go first. And there's this one, I have to look it up. I can't remember what it is. That's another problem I have, that I grew up in church and like I know a lot of the Bible, but I can't remember where I get it. Like which proverb is that? I got to Google it. But anyway, there's one where it essentially says a stable without an oxen stays clean
Yeah.
or something like that. But you need an ox for a harvest. And like I always come back to that. Anytime I catch myself saying like, oh, but this is going to be more work, in the short term, I remind myself of that. Yes. But in order to have a harvest, you need an ox. And what do oxes do? They poop
Make a mess.
and they make a mess. So like there is a certain aspect of business that like, look, sometimes there's work we don't want to do. Your ox is going to poop.
Yeah, no,
you got to clean it up.
The next part of what part of me is the problem, what part of you is the problem, is discerning, or just discernment in general, but discerning when to push through versus letting go. And I think this goes back to inviting someone else into the conversation. But that can be, I mean, like discerning that can be really hard. Like, do I see it through and do the work, consistently show up, maybe setting some kind of like by this time situation, or do I let go? And I have been on both sides of this, y'all. And we need the Holy Spirit. That's all I'm saying. We need the Holy Spirit, because that part of me can be the problem. Not accurately discerning, do I push or do I let go?
Yeah, this is a hard one because it isn't clear cut. And I think just really being honest with yourself, as honest as you can be, especially about when you say, I want to do this thing, whatever the change is, but what comes after that but? I think really keying in on those things. Are all of those buts things that is it just because you're afraid? Going back to stuff we highlighted earlier, is it stuff that you're rooted in fear and you're not trusting God? Maybe that's a good indication, like a good indication of what you need to do. Also, I think taking in your tendencies. So looking back over your life, do you have a tendency to take the easy way out? Do you have a tendency to give up before you should? Do you have a tendency to get bored and just change things because you're bored? Like if you can be really honest about what are your tendencies, especially in times of stress and like when things aren't great. We need to talk more Enneagram. I know you love Enneagram stuff.
I love the Enneagram.
But what I don't like about a lot of personality tests and all that stuff is like people kind of look at it like justifying their dysfunction. What I like about the Enneagram is it's more about knowing your tendencies, especially in times of stress, so that you can make better choices and like better yourself. It's not just about saying like, this is how I am, I'm flighty. Quit being flighty and get your life together.
Or avoid getting to that place of fight or flight that you feel like you have to fight. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think just really being honest with tendencies, and then using that to then go to someone else and say like, what do you see that I'm not seeing? Invite someone else into that, especially someone that you trust, and try to have some help if it's a little too blurry, a little too distorted. You can't tell.
Yeah. Sometimes we need other people to help us with our discernment. The next thing on the list is emotional, spiritual, and mental flexibility. So if I'm looking at what part of me is the problem that maybe needs to be solved before I take big swings or make these big changes, am I being emotionally, spiritually, and mentally flexible? Some of you guys are so married to the model, whether it's working or not, that you're unwilling to see what else is available, what else is an option, what else, like you're so rigid. Some of y'all are the most rigid yoga teachers I've ever met. This is the way this is thus saith the word of the Lord. This is the way we have to do it. Hey, that worked back then. Remember what's no longer working? That worked back then. But in this season with these people in this place, that may not be what thus saith the word of the Lord anymore, right? Like he may be changing some stuff inside of you, changing the people that you're being called to lead, right? So for me, what I'm looking at is am I a part of this problem? Am I being inflexible in these ways? I need to look at that and reflect on that.
Yeah, maybe one more thing we get out of this, and I know this is longer than we originally planned, but this is all. I feel like this has been a really good conversation, good stuff to discuss. Is there a skill set that you need to develop, either a new skill you need to learn, or one that you just need to develop, like your leadership? So that could be another part of you that's the problem. Could it just be an area that I need to grow in skill wise?
Yeah, no, that's so good. So we've asked ourselves what's working or what was working that's no longer working. What part of me is the problem? And the last question that I asked myself that I'm going to ask you and just give you some ideas for us to talk through. What is one tiny tweak that could make a big difference? I think, when we look at pivoting, sometimes we think it has to be this huge overhaul when sometimes for this season, it just may be, adding a team member or changing the compensation plan, changing the schedule to be more conducive to your lifestyle or the new people that you might be called to lead, increasing rates, adding new services to your existing offerings, so those are some things that I wrote down. Nick, do you have any on that one?
Most of the time, if the problem is big, it's not going to be fixed with a little tweak. So if we're talking more like smaller scale issues, then yeah, usually like maybe I could make one tweak. But usually if the problem is big, if you're close to, like, if the ship's on fire, it's rare that a little tweak is going to make any difference. So I think that kind of dictates that the severity of your problem. That really is a theme in this whole thing. The severity of your problem will dictate our response here. But sometimes there are little tweaks, but what's big about it is your fear around making the tweak.
Yeah.
Like a rate increase is kind of like a small change. It can feel massive, especially early on when you're just getting started. You maybe go from free classes to, like, what do you call it, a donation based, and then like that's not working. I feel like I need to charge, but I'm afraid to. Or like you're charging like $5 for a class, like you should be around like $10 or $12. Like that can feel like a huge thing, even though I would say your rate increase is really not that big of a deal.
That's really good. And what we're talking about just in this conversation is I've experienced both. I feel like where I'm at now, I think just a couple of tiny tweaks could kind of just be the pivot that I need to sustain this thing, but there have been seasons but I think sometimes we think like, what's the big thing? I have to do it. And so that's why I think where I'm at when I was asking myself these questions, like what are some tiny tweaks that I can make that might make a big difference? So those are the ones I came up with.
So y'all, that was a lot. I know that was a lot, but hopefully you found this helpful and there's something in there that maybe applies to you now. Because usually there's little things, like, what, I probably need to make this change, or, it's probably time to shift some things. Like those things come up, and the longer you ignore those little whisperings, the bigger deal it becomes down the road. So just kind of pay attention to that. Are there little whispering? If you're not in the season of like something's got to change, that maybe there's little things, and I would just advise you to still go through this process with those things and maybe make a pivot or make a change before it becomes a bigger deal.
Just some closing thoughts that I have. that again, I just wrote down and reminded myself. So that was a lot. And it maybe can feel like a lot of information to intake, but know that it's coming straight from the tap today. Because remember, we were supposed to talk about something completely different. We already had all our things, but this episode itself was a pivot. So I'm trusting God that it's going to land exactly where it is. So I want to share a couple of closing thoughts with you as we come to a close. The first one is a good thing is not always a God thing. I believe it was Lisa Turkhurst that said that. A good thing is not always a God thing. And again, this is real time for me. So I'm sitting with and kind of wrestling with and grappling with, am I holding on to something that it's good, it's working well, but it may not be what God has for me? Or do I just need to implement some of the things that we just talked about and continue and keep moving forward, taking my next step? So good thing's not always a God thing. And then for me, sometimes my fear of success or fear of the unknown in that success or what I need to be, who I need to be, can cause me to pivot too quickly. And I know this about myself. Nick was talking earlier about just knowing your tendencies, being self-aware. I know that when I don't seek God first and I seek Kristen first and my feelings, which are valid but not fact, I can tend to course correct too quickly or too big. And that's where I'm at with this is like, I want to walk in wisdom. I want to make sure that like, hey, God, this is a great thing, but is it your thing? Are we still on the same page here? Or if it is, give me all the wisdom that you promised me to lead this team and this community through what you have for them, and not pivot too quickly one way or another.
Yeah, I think to add on to that sometimes people may not give things enough time too. That when you're trying something new, there's a period of like trial and error, and that's actually part of the process to just try some things. Okay, that didn't work. Well, let me tweak it a little bit before I just kill this. Let me just tweak some things. This offering didn't work. Okay, well, maybe was it the time of day? Was it how many days of the week? Am I just offering too many classes and people weren't showing up because there's just too many options? Before you make major changes, maybe there's some of these smaller things, like we said in point number 3, like, are there smaller adjustments we could make before you make big changes, like just totally taking something off the board? And then to your point, your first one about a good thing is not always a God thing, that saying yes to something means saying no to something else. And so sometimes saying yes to something that's good, but maybe not the best, you're saying no to something that might be the best. We all only have a certain amount of energy and time in the day. We can only do so much. And so if you're saying yes to some things that are good, but maybe not God's best for you, or maybe the plans have changed, your calling might have shifted, whatever the reason, those things might still be good. Serving that community that you're feeling like it's pivoting, it's changing who I need to serve, that's still a good thing, but is that God's best for you? And is God's best something else? So sometimes we have to say no to a good thing so that we have the margin to say yes to the best. My last thought here is that at the end of the day, you need to do what's best for you. It's so easy, especially when you're empathetic and this is the people you've been called to serve. Like it's not always clear cut and just like easy to see. It's not black or white. There's a lot of gray in the middle. In the end, you need to do what's best for you because it's your business. It's your livelihood. This affects you and your life more than it affects theirs. And so if you're just trying to please everybody, you're going to please nobody. Everyone's going to be miserable. So yeah, take into account other people's preferences, take into account advice from other people. But at the end of the day, you need to do what's best for you. And even if that is not what's best for other people, even if it's not what they prefer or what they want, they'll adjust. Again, the right ones will be on the bus. The wrong ones, again, don't kill me for saying wrong ones, but the people you are not called to serve will get off the bus and make room for more of the people who are.
And they'll go find their own bus, the right bus for them.
Yeah. And that's them saying yes to a good thing to miss their best thing. Get them out and they'll find the best thing for them. Okay. So my final thought with all of this is the sort of thing we help walk other people through. So we have a client that we're coaching right now one-on-one, or really we call it 2-on-1 because you get both of us, where she was really feeling like what she had was not working. And we've been walking her through, let's make a change. What do we change? How do we change it? And all of the stuff that we've just talked through are things that we've helped her through. And she sent this message the other day. She says, I feel more at peace than I have in a long time. And that is because of both of you. And not to toot our own horns, but like, if you're needing help, we can help you. And if not us, like, that's fine. Find, like, you need help. Find help from somebody. If you don't have the investment to make into like a coach, then find a mentor, someone that you trust, someone who you could take to coffee and I don't know, just develop that relationship. You need somebody. But if you want to fast track your success, if you want to skip over a whole lot of the trial and error, you can draw from our experience of building a studio in person together, of building online offerings, of pivoting multiple times, of building a series based thing. Like there's so much that we can help people with and help you navigate the choices. And we don't decide it for you, but we definitely help you make decisions that are best for you. We would love to be that for you. For more information on that, you can just message us on any of our like social media accounts or email. Just let us know that you're interested in coaching and we'll send you some next steps.
Yeah, this is like my favorite thing that we get to do is like really just even this podcast, just pouring back into leaders. We're doing the footwork, but it's God who's changing lives and who's bringing peace and doing all of those things. We're just on our bus, putting as many people on as we can. And it is so rewarding. It's so wonderful to get to watch these leaders take their very next step, go through some of the same things that we talk about here, some of the things that I've gone through over a span of years. And, they're doing it within a year and getting through it so much quicker. And it's an honor for us to get to walk along some of you in your journey. And yeah, we'd love to chat if you guys want to hit us up.
So friend, I hope you did find that helpful. And if someone came to mind who could benefit from this, if you know another teacher, and honestly, you don't even have to be a yoga teacher for this, because this really applies to any kind of pivot or change in life in general. But if someone came to mind, would you share it with them? Because that would really help us spread the message, help us help more people, which is really what we're trying to do with this. That's why we're doing this podcast. That's why we offer all of this valuable content for free, because we want to help other people. So we would consider that a huge favor, sharing this with other people. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.